Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, to my YouTube playlist, where I review books that can help us make better games for training and development and learning and development. And today's book is What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy by James G. And okay, I know that I'm super late for this review of the book, for this book's review, I should say, but I will not waste time apologizing. I already created a video where I apologize, and the apology is quite long. So let's get right into it. So one of the first things that I like to answer to myself and to whoever is watching before I start, going through the book is, why should you, listen to this video and read the book? Well, quite simply because this book is amazing and it will really impact and influence the quality of the games that you are creating. The idea or the premise is that all games for learning and development should be good games, well-designed games, right? So if we want to achieve this, one, let's say not so easy, quite a quick way, but one way nonetheless to achieve this is by absorbing the knowledge from people who have spent quite a lot of time studying games. And in this case, I am talking about James G. and the book What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. So, just a supposed caveat is that, to my knowledge, no book out there is going to tell you, take this part, put it on top of this, mix it with this something, and then you're going to create a good game for learning and development. That's just not, or simply not, how games are created, or good games, I should say, and that is not how you should try to create your games for learning and development. Besides, there are many styles and ways of creating games, especially games for learning and development. I particularly advocate for a good mixture of physical and digital. And yes, even during these times of social isolation and working and studying online, I still advocate for a mixture of physical and digital. Nonetheless, many games out there are physical. In the world of physical games, say for example tabletop games and board games, there is a multitude of different types of games, different mechanisms, different strategies, different ways of presenting information, different ways of interacting with people. And it is the same when it comes to digital games. So no book exists, again, to the best of my knowledge out there, that is going to tell you how to create a game for learning and development simply by telling you to put pieces together and then you're going to create a book. You're going to create a game. And this book shouldn't really exist, because games are advancing, progressing, evolving as we speak. And what it is perhaps a valid way to run a game today may not be so tomorrow. So we need to adjust, and I believe the digital medium is a much better way to transmit this information. So that was quite a long introduction, I suppose. So the first question, or the first idea, paragraph, I'm not sure what to call it, that popped from this book by James G. is, good video games reflect in their design good principles of learning. And let's get more into it. At the end, we are going to go back to this paragraph, to this idea, and hopefully by the end of the video it will make sense. We are going to get more information and we are going to discuss this a little bit more, but write it down, take a screenshot, because we are going to come back to this idea at the end, as I said. This book talks about a theory of human learning built into good video games. And my understanding is that it's based on 3 areas of research. First is situated learning. The second is new literacies, sorry, my pronunciation. And the third one is connectionism. And while I'm not saying that you should create a video game, to improve the learning of people in your classroom or in your workshop, because it may be a daunting task, quite a big task. What I'm saying by promoting this book is that we should critically observe good video games and take some elements to apply it to corporate learning and learning in schools or universities. And before we move further, I'm going to say that the book, and hopefully not so much the video, but the book does contain sometimes some concepts that can be a little bit difficult to get our heads around, but don't get intimidated by those concepts. Once you read them, and perhaps read them the second time and the third time, then it all makes sense. Keep going through the book, and I can guarantee you the learning you're going to get is going to be amazing. But one of such concepts in the book, quite early in the book, is that of the semiotic domain. And perhaps you never heard this phrase before, this definition, semiotic domain. And for me, it was a little bit of what? And I had to read and reread and then go to, Google what does semiotic domain means. And once I Googled it, the answer that Google gave me was that it was James G. who coined this definition. So let's try to explain what this is. So semiotic domains are practices such as language, images, and symbols that we use to communicate meaning. And we need to understand that there are many kinds of semiotic domains, not just the ones that are used in schools for teaching. And this is one of the key messages throughout the book, and hopefully as well throughout this video. So in order to learn something new in a new semiotic domain, not only the one that we're used to through the teaching that goes on in schools and universities. So to learn in a new semiotic domain, we need first experiencing the world in a new way. That's really important. Second, we need to form new affiliations. And third, we need preparing for future learning. And so, for learning to be active and critical, we need to think at a meta level. We need to understand learning as a complex systems of interrelated parts, and we need to innovate in the given domain, whichever the domain is that we are studying at the moment. This could be biology, geography, history, project management, whatever domain. We need to reach this level of innovation in order for the learning to be active and critical. And here the word critical just, popped out and made me question something. We are calling active learning something which is kind of cutting edge there in the world of education. But here James G. says that active learning is good, critical learning is much better. So perhaps we should even call it critical learning instead of just active learning. I don't know, I suppose food for thought. So the premise here in this book is that video games are good at fostering critical thinking since they operate in a situated meaning style of learning. What does James G. mean by situated meaning? In order for us, for people to learn, we need to practice. Human behavior specialists know it, game designers know it, as a matter of fact, and schools don't know how to get it right, even when they know that this is one of the principles of learning. We forget what we learn very quickly. That is something that I was listening to in one of the YouTube channels that I follow, and they call it the forgetting curve. And it tracks on a curve, nicely presented. I'm not sure how accurate it is. It's pretty accurate, but I'm not sure if there is a more modern theory that replaces this curve. But it shows that once we learn something, if we don't practice it, we forget majority of it within the next 7 days, or actually the longer the time, the more the curve goes down. The point is that we forget quite a lot of what we learn if we don't practice it. And we also know that practicing can be boring, if there is no incentive or something else to keep us, going through the materials over and over or in different ways. So one example, I suppose, imagine trying to learn a new language simply by repeating the verbs and conjugating them in the different forms. I am, for example, you are, he is, she is, so on and so forth. Or as is happening to me with Polish, ja jestem, ty jesteś, I suppose, jest. Anyhow, I'm terrible at Polish. The point is that learning in such a way is really bad, and I'm sure you don't have to imagine it, because if you have had, the opportunity to learn a new language, and somehow you were learning the language in this old-fashioned way, which is simply repeating the verbs and the conjugations, that is not very effective, and you don't feel like actually picking up the book and repeating I am, you are, he is, she is. It's just simply not engaging. The problem is that we need to practice, we need to repeat. And video games have a solution to this problem, Actually, they have a solution that can be explained in many different ways. The first way we are going to explain this solution is through something that James G. calls amplification of input. What this really means is that little inputs gives us a lot of outputs, and it keeps us motivated to keep on going, learning and practicing. So if you are familiar with gamification, you will know this concept, perhaps not by this name, amplification of input, but you will know how this works. It's widely used in gamification. And another example of how this works, and I'm taking this a little bit from my personal, I suppose, experiences. When I was in high school studying, I went to a sort of special high school in which we were learning, the basic stuff, but on top of that, every day we had 3 hours of specialized knowledge that gave us a sort of minor degree in some specific areas. For example, I decided to go for accountancy. Other people went for business management, or say, for example, some of my friends at the time took tourism as well. So there were different options. In my case, I took accountancy. So imagine this scenario. You have to learn and practice how to balance the books, and then get it right, because when it comes to balancing the books, you either get it right or get it wrong. And the way of practicing this, at least when I was doing it, was terribly boring. But imagine you have a scenario in which you are doing it not because you need to balance the books so everything is okay and you prove that you learned, but you are doing it to make sure that the company avoids, say, for example, going to court or taking the CFO, to court and possibly to jail due to the books not being balanced. So if you achieve this, then you feel like you did something that has meaning, instead of just, trying to memorize and understand how to, in this case, balance the books. And okay, video games can make repetition fun and give us big virtual rewards that encourage us to keep on learning, but that's not all. Remember, I told you that games have a solution, and we are going to take the solution and deconstruct it in different ways. So the first one was amplification of input, and the second one we're going to talk now is context. And through context and experimentation, we can apply the following model. Probe, create a hypothesis, then reprobe and rethink. This hypothesis or this method is how children learn, but interestingly enough, this as well is how experts work. And I'm talking about engineers, scientists. So this method that I explained to you, we know it almost instinctively when we are children and we are playing with the world and trying to understand and make sense of what is around us. Then schools kind of try to wipe that out of us, how we think. But somehow, magically, People who specialize in some areas like science and technology, unfortunately not so much in areas like business management and other areas. I don't want to go in there, but I do believe that majority of the schools, universities that teach business management in the world should actually close down. But anyhow, so people who specialize in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, in this kind of areas of education, they rediscover this model and apply it, and this is how they do their work. And okay, going back to business, this cycle has been presented by many different people by different names. One of them is the plan, do, act, exactly what I mentioned before. There is another famous one that a lot of people quote in the world of business, which is the make cycle. And there is also this one that is a bit more popular now in design thinking, which is to create a hypothesis, to develop a prototype, to test it, collect data, adjust it, and it's kind of a cycle. But again, the point is that all of this is included in this model that I mentioned to you before. And video games are excellent at allowing people to learn how to work with the probe, hypothesis, reprobe, and rethink cycle. And the key for this is context. And through context, when we come in contact with new information through context, we create new patterns. And creating new patterns is a fantastic affordance of games instead of just memorizing facts, which, by the way, even memorizing facts is harder to do without context. And the key here is pattern. All right, so next point, or next sort of general idea in the book, which is that active and critical thinking allow learners to design and create knowledge. Creating anything in computer games may seem a little bit intimidating to people who, like myself, I suppose, are called non-digital natives. That means that we were not born with, a mobile phone in our hands. So this idea of creating new content for a video game may seem intimidating to us, but it's not so much so for young learners who, by the way, this is proven through research, are spending a lot of time creating content for the video games and computer games that they're actually playing with. New knowledge, creating something new, is also possible through board games and tabletop games. And this is an area that I have spoken about, written about, and presented, tested as well in the University of Economics Krakow, here in Poland, through a product, a learning solution that I developed called Toolbox for Creativity. And the idea is to allow people to learn as they create prototypes of tabletop games. All right, so remember this concept at the start of the book that I told you to screenshot and try to remember? So let's get back to it. Good video games reflect in their design good principles of learning, and they do so because players need to learn how to play the game fast enough. Otherwise, the game is not going to be popular. More importantly, players also need to learn how to learn in the game. Otherwise, the game is not going to work and is not going to sell. One of the things that make video games so powerful is their ability to create whole worlds and invite players to take on various identities within them. And these worlds and identities do something quite amazing and interesting, which is they work with mental models, and they can do two things. They can challenge them and therefore at the end of the exercise perhaps create a new mental model, or they can actually reinforce the mental model that the students, the learners, the players had before they interacted with the video games or the games in general, and simply can reinforce the mental model. And the problem is that the mental model may have been wrong to begin with. And here is where teachers actually do an amazing, or have the potential to do an amazing thing, which is they can work alongside the games to ensure that what the learners, what the people interacted with the games are learning is something good, let's call it this way. And something as well that games do, in this case video games, as James G is talking about, and this is his research is on video games. Video games expose those models. However, and as I mentioned before, if the students are to change these mental models, the teachers, the lecturers, need to be aware of these mental models, and games are excellent at exposing these mental models. And perhaps when you hear me talk about these mental models and learners, you think that I'm focusing mainly on schools and universities. And perhaps I did, but that was not my intention. So let's now just make sure that I will also focus on corporate learning. So remember that at the beginning I showed this framework in which how kids learn, young people, and then I show you that the same framework or model is used by people in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Well, it turns out that good corporations, let me repeat this, not all corporations, are using this cycle in order to improve how the people in the corporation learn, therefore making the corporation more agile and resilient. Because a large majority of corporations nowadays are undergoing transformation. So then we have this model here that applies to kids and experts, as I mentioned, experts in science, technology, and also people working in corporations. But so what? The key is that this is also how games work. So learning here in games is social distributors and is part and parcel of a network composed of people, tools, technologies, and all of these interconnected. Yet, unfortunately, schools still work in a model of teaching, and I'm talking about schools but also universities and colleges, work in a model that they isolate the learners from these powerful networks of technology and networks of their peers, and test and assess them in an isolated way. And this creates a paradox, and I can love paradoxes. So let's see this paradox presented by James G. If the human mind is a powerful pattern recognizer, remember I told you that through this book and the theories presented by James G, pattern is key. So if the human mind is a powerful pattern recognizer, then what is most important about thinking is not that it's mental, but rather that it's social. So thinking and reasoning are inherently social, but they are also inherently distributed, and more so in our modern technological worlds. Remember, I told you that I was going to pay more attention to corporations and our work. And more, again, this situation is so in our modern technological world. And by this, I mean that each of us lets other people and the various tools and technologies that we possess do some of the thinking for us. So, just an example. If you pick up your mobile, your cell phone, whatever you call it, depending on the part of the world you are in, you have the list of telephones, let's say, for example, of the people you love and you care and that you call or contact regularly. How many of those telephone numbers you know? Probably one, maximum two, because we don't, and it's not that our brain has, decreased in the capacity of memorizing numbers. Like, I remember when I was in high school, I knew about 4 full telephone numbers of people that I had to call, including the telephone number of my parents. And by the way, I'm talking about landlines. So I knew the landline of the house I lived in, my parents' house, I suppose. And the landlines of friends of mine and whatever. Now we don't know those numbers because we don't need to. We are transferring that decision making, I suppose it's not decision making, but that's storing of information to devices. So whether it's our computer, our mobile cell phone, which is somehow as well interconnected with the computer that we use because it's all in the clouds, and that's how we keep information. So this is what we call about distributors knowledge. And this is obvious to, as I said, many industries and many people, but it's not so obvious to formal education. And again, I'm talking about schools, universities, and colleges. But in the modern world, it is equally important, and perhaps more so, to know what a person can think when it's surrounded and communicates with others, and as well using the tools and technologies available to them. And I think now this next point is quite fantastic, so pay attention to it. If we want to know how good students are going to do in science, or good employees are going to do in their job in a modern knowledge world, we should start by asking these 3 questions. What is in their heads? How well they can leverage knowledge in other people and in various tools, and how are they positioned within a network? Anyway, I don't know you, but when I read that, it was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I hope one day this actually translates into how we interview people and how we interact with them whenever they're making decisions, or whenever we are making decisions about the employees and the students' future. So buckle up now, because it's going to get even more interesting. So in the modern world of what James G. defines as new capitalism, which is a capitalism based on knowledge rather than industrial and assembled lines. And remember, according to the World Economic Forum and other sources of information, we are currently on the 4th industrial revolution. So according to the new capitalism that James G. describes, which is based on knowledge, we must more and more come to see ourselves not in terms of linear progression up a career ladder, so not linear, but as a portfolio. A portfolio, by the way, composed of rearrangeable skills and identities. This is very cool. Rearrangeable identities. So anyhow, a portfolio composed of rearrangeable skills and identities that we have acquired through our trajectory through diverse projects. And these projects are inside and outside of our workplaces as we move from job to job, from project to project, and career to career in a fast changing world. So you see, do you think something as amazing as this, as a changing world that demands that we change our jobs, our careers, and identities was going to be presented in this book? I wasn't expecting this. I was surprised when I read it. I also specialize on corporate transformation, and I'm fascinated to find something about corporate transformation in a book about video games and learning. Anyway, I'm really grateful for this book, and I hope you enjoy it too. And more about corporate transformation. So the holy grail of training and organizational transformation is tacit knowledge. And in this context, James G. talks about the tacit knowledge that workers acquire online as they adapt to constant changes in practice. And surprise, surprise, it also fits well with the way people learn in video games, or in games, I would say as well, not only video games. But anyhow, James G. is talking about video games, so he says that this model of leveraging tacit knowledge fits in well with how players learn in video games. So this is, I would say, what is called the power of games, good video games allow players not just to be passive consumers, but also active producers who can customize their own learning experience. So now we are going to go to the conclusions, and we are close to the end. So conclusion number 1, the argument in this book, remember from the beginning, the argument in this book is not that what people are learning when they are playing video games is always good. Rather, that they are doing when they are playing video games is often good learning. Okay, I'm going to write it down here and I'm going to put it here. Let you pause and go through this at your own leisure. It could be a little bit confusing, or it took me a while to get my head around, but it's powerful and it's simple once you get over the wordy part. Conclusion number 2. Video games are a new form of art. They will not replace books. They will sit beside them, interact with them, and change them and their role in society in various ways. And finally, again, going back to the first statements there at the beginning of the book, James G. says that he has made but one claim on this book, which is that games operate with good principles of learning. Principles that are better than those in many of the traditional schools, as he defines here: skill and drill, back to bases, test them until they drop type of schools. And just to wrap it up, all of it, the book also contains 36 principles of learning, which I will not show here in this video because the video will be too long, and also I don't want to show you everything from the book in this video. It will not be fair to you, it will not be fair to James G. and the people who are behind this book. My purpose is simply to show you how much the book inspired me to create my learning solutions, my products, my games. And to be honest, this book was a huge influence in creating Toolbox for Creativity. Remember, I told you, I come from the point of view that through developing prototypes of board games and tabletop games, learning can be facilitated. And I'm talking about learning in pretty much every single area of the learning scope. And that's what I'm planning to do with Toolbox for Creativity. This is my research. This is the product that I'm taking to Kickstarter, by the way. And hopefully by the time you watch this video, you will be able to as well see the evolution of my project, taking Toolbox for Creativity to Kickstarter, which is also available in my YouTube channel. So this is it. We have come to the end of this video. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you as well go and buy the book and enjoy it as much as I did. And please use the learnings from this book and the previous books that I have also reviewed in order to make well-designed games for learning and development. Games for training and development as well. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, leave a comment at the end of the video or through whichever social media you come in contact with this video. Also, if you like us, share it and subscribe to the channel. Help me promote the words of better games for learning and development. And if you have the time, also help me spread the word about Toolbox for Creativity. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.